I will avenge your father! I will save your mother! I would kill you, Vilna! Izomir was that kid, like, way too happy at the beginning. I mean, I think that's kind of the point. You need this kind of wide-eyed, happy youth to really juxtapose the brutal savage he will become. But yeah, he was, like, way too happy at the beginning of the film. As of right now, I currently regard Robert Eggers' The Northman as the best film of 2022. To me, this film was just an incredible, epic, Viking, historical epic. It was a fantastically well-directed and well-made film with a familiar story. Like, I won't lie, narratively, this film is just Hamlet. If you're unfamiliar with Shakespeare's Hamlet, then you're going to be in for a bit of a surprise. But other than that, most people know what the tale of Hamlet is, though from what I understand, the legend of Amleth is actually the inspiration Shakespeare took when making Hamlet, and so technically the Northman is the original version of Hamlet. Does that make any sense? Because that sounded better in my head than it did out loud. The Northman to me is my favourite Robert Eggers film. Granted, he's only made 3 and I haven't seen The Witch, and when it came to The Lighthouse is a very weird and bizarre film. I liked it, but it's also a film that isn't necessarily for me. It's a very psychedelic film, and to me, when it comes to psychedelic stuff, I'm very hit and miss. Sometimes I enjoy it, sometimes I just find it very boring and sort of doze off. But with The Lighthouse, I found it interesting because whilst there were points where I thought I was going to doze off in The Lighthouse, either through the direction or the writing or the performances of Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe, they would just do something that was so batshit insane that I went from going, to, oh my god, wait, what's going on? What the hell? This movie is insane. Though it is nice to see that Robert Eggers brings in that sort of psychedelic element and implements it throughout The Northman, whilst he also manages to perfectly capture and blend the historical epic Viking fantasy. It's so well done. Everything about this film that you want in terms of scale and action and gore and writing is just perfect. It's a really great historical epic. And what I found interesting was that I saw a poster for this film, and on the poster, a quote basically said that this film was this generation's version of Gladiator. And I completely agree. That, I think, is the perfect summation of what The Northman is. It's my generation's version of Gladiator, even though I was born in 2000 and Gladiator, I think, came out in 2000. But either way, my generation's version of Gladiator is The Northman, and just, I love this movie. For me, one of the shining highlights of The Northman was Alexander Skarsgård as Amleth. His performance was just incredible, and this was the first film where I really took notice of Alexander Skarsgård, because I was aware of Alexander Skarsgård. I'd seen him in David Yates' The Legend of Tarzan, and granted, I couldn't judge his performance because even though he was ripped as hell in that film, I couldn't judge his performance because I only watched half an hour of the film before turning it off because I thought the film was utterly dull and boring. And he was also in Godzilla vs. Kong, and granted, you can't really judge anyone's performance based in a film called Godzilla vs. Kong. And also, Godzilla vs. Kong is just weird. Like, it's bad, I don't know, it's a kaiju film, but, like, it's not a very well done kaiju film in my opinion. But The Northman to me was where I really got to see Alexander Skarsgård shine as a performer. Granted, he doesn't have a lot of dialogue, his character is very much a brute savage, but the way Skarsgård manages to play that character physically, but also seeing the thought process shine through his eyes was just incredible. I mean, the scene for me that really just stood out in my mind where I went, oh, Alexander Skarsgård is a powerhouse of a performer, especially physically, was the scene after it cuts to him in present day, and he's at this campfire, and he's basically working himself up into a berserker rage, and it's just, oh my god, you can just see it in his eyes and in his physicality. He's like panting really heavily and his abs are like heaving and he's just like salivating in the mouth and his eyes are just manic and feral and savage, and I'm like, oh my god, this guy is fantastic. Like, holy shit. Granted, the fact that he put on like 20 or 30 pounds of muscle for this role was just insane. I mean, he looks like an absolute brute savage, and just, it really brings out that sort of primal instinct that you really believe that this guy is an absolute berserker, savage monster, which really just helps add into the character who is on this quest for revenge against his uncle. And I think the choice that Robert Eggers made in accentuating Amleth's physicality was just perfect, because it really is just a very primal, masculine movie in a way. This film is very much glorifying but also not glorifying the Viking culture, because granted, the Vikings were not good people. You see it in this movie when the Vikings raid the villages. it is awful and horrific and terrible. But also, Robert Eggers said he wanted to make this film the most historically accurate Viking film. And he succeeded because he managed to capture the pretty much glorification of violence and brutality that the Vikings used to basically aspire to be. Because whilst to a modern day audience we're horrified at the actions of the Vikings, if you go back into Viking history, you realize that this is their end goal. They wanted to die in glorious battle, either through revenge or bloodlust or in war. They wanted that. Ethan Hawke's character, Amleth's father, says that at the beginning of the film. And by the end of the film, when Amleth dies in battle, he pretty much achieved it. He's rewarded because he's sent to Valhalla at the end. Anya Taylor-Joy is also just great in this film as Amleth's love interest, Olga. I mean, she's a little bit more than that. She is pretty much Amleth's accomplice in this film, and she is just fantastic. Anya Taylor-Joy is great. She's one of the best working young actors today. She's fantastic, and her character is also really interesting too, because at the beginning of the film, when we meet her during the village raid, her introduction is so subtle, and I love it because you'd expect her, because she is technically the female lead, you'd expect her to have this grand epic reveal, but no, our first sighting of her is just her trying to kill one of the raiders of the village. It's so subtle and just, I love it. And then she teams up with Amleth to basically cause chaos in Fjolnir's village, and that bit's great too. But then after realizing that they both need to run away together, they do. But the thing that I love is that no matter how happy Amleth is, the idea of revenge and his thirst for revenge overpowers everything else. Because once he's on that ship with Olga and he finds out that she's pregnant, after the initial happiness he has, he suddenly realizes that no, he has to kill Fjolnir, because if he doesn't, Fjolnir will hunt them all across the world, no matter where they are. And I love the fact that he basically deluded himself into thinking that, because whilst it is possible Fjolnir would have done that, they had the entire world to run away and hide from Fjolnir. But no, because Amleth has basically deluded himself into the fact that he needs to get revenge, he leaves what is essentially his happiness in Olga and goes to essentially what is his certain death. Nicole Kidman as Amleth's mother in this film was also just spectacular. The twist, I think it's a twist. I don't remember if this is a twist in the Shakespearean play of Hamlet, but the twist where you find out that Amleth's mother didn't love his father, but in fact loved Fjolnir, and practically begged Fjolnir to kill Amleth's father, was just such a great reveal, and Robert Eggers really just has so much fun playing with it. It's so good. The scene is just really, really uncomfortable too, because she starts making out with Amleth, and you're just like, oh my god, is this gonna go full on incest? What? And then you find out that she did that in order to try and steal the Nightblade from him to kill him. It's so good. The twist is so good. The foreshadowing of this film, I've seen this film twice. The visual foreshadowing is incredible, because the sigil of Amleth's house, I think, is a raven or a hawk. But either way, when you see Nicole Kidman's character in present day, she's outside of a window shooing away ravens, visually showing that she's shooing away Amleth's father, already signifying to the audience that she never loved Amleth's father. It's so good. This movie is just superb on a cinematography level. It's so good. I just find the character work in this film to be so rich. Amleth forms a bond with Fjolnir's youngest son, and it's so good. There's the sequence in the film where they're basically playing this bat and ball game. I have no clue what the rules of this game are, because at first I thought it was like rugby, where you had to get the ball to the other side and basically get a try. But then it's not. They start like whacking the ball with bats and they're hitting posts, and I'm like, how do you actually win this game? And when Fjolnir's youngest son runs onto the pitch and is attacked by, I think it's the actor who played the Mountain from Game of Thrones, when he attacks Fjolnir's youngest son and basically knocks him to the ground and knocks him out, I thought the kid died at that point. It was so brutal. I mean, they didn't, but in terms of character work, it's really rich, because you see Amleth basically tackle the Mountain to the ground after he's attacked the kid and just beats the absolute shit out of him. And then you see Fjolnir basically gain respect for him, being like, oh wow, you saved my son. Honestly, it's so good. And then when Amleth returns back to the village to essentially kill Fjolnir for the final time, and he kills Nicole Kidman, he kills his mother, and then he has to kill Fjolnir's youngest son because Fjolnir's youngest son stabs him with the dagger, obviously being the metaphor of the poison dagger from Hamlet, but yeah, he stabs him with the dagger, and Amleth kills him. And the look on Skarsgård's face just says it all. It's very much a, I didn't want to kill this kid. God, why did I kill this kid? But also, I only killed him in self-defense, and just, it's so good. Like, when he's on the base of the volcano, and he buries his mother and Fjolnir's youngest son, and he plants kisses on their foreheads, like, The character work in this film is amazing. And then you have the big final showdown between Amleth and Fjolnir at the base of a volcano, Revenge of the Sith style, and it's just glorious. It is dirty and filthy and grimy. They're both naked, very much accentuating their muscular bodies. And it's just a testosterone-filled moment of just like, yep, these are two savages, both with the intent to kill. And it's so good. Like, even though Amleth is losing the battle, Skarsgård just once again does fantastic emotional acting when he thinks he's lost, but then he manages to summon up just enough rage and anger and lust for revenge to finally just lay one final blow, decapitating Fjolnir, whilst Fjolnir also stabs him. It's overall the ending to Hamlet, the tragic nature of it, but also just... it's so good. Robert Eggers' use of physicality is very similar to Zack Snyder's use of the male form in 300, where he's basically accentuating and glorifying the physicality and anatomy of the male body, basically having all these men incredibly ripped and in shape to really just accentuate the idea that this was what the culture was like. You had to be strong, you had to be tough, you had to be mean, you had to be fierce in order to be respected. It's all just incredibly well thought out, and getting onto it, the cinematography for this film was just gorgeous. It was both simple and stylistic, similar to The Lighthouse, but also it very much had the scale of a historical epic. Including the action sequences, the action in this film is superb. The illusion of one takes, or maybe they were all done in one take, but the illusion of oners were fantastic. The raid at the village in the beginning of the film was just so good. When Amleth catches the spear a guy throws at him, and then he throws it back at him, and then they charge at the wooden wall, and he starts climbing the wall, and the camera is just tracking him as he does so. It's just so well done. It's incredibly well thought out and masterful. But even the camera work done in other scenes that weren't related to the action sequences were also fantastic. Our introductory shot to Amleth in the present day was just so well done, where the camera is on the shore, you see the longboat sail past, and then the camera basically just starts going forward, and then, you know, pans and tracks to find Amleth rowing the boat. It's incredibly well done. And the pacing for this film was also really good in my opinion. I've heard people say that it's slow, but I really don't think so. Robert Eggers decides to segment each part of the film with little title cards, basically making this like a chapter of a story. And I think it really helps the pacing, because even if like you wanted to watch half the film one day, and then you get to the end of a chapter, you can pause it there and then come back to it the next day and be like, yep, I'm ready to watch this. I mean, I personally prefer to watch everything all at once, but still, the option of little chapter title cards is really cool in my opinion. Now, one of these psychedelic sequences in the film was a little bit confusing to me. The scene where Amleth gets the Nightblade from the skeleton is a good scene, and the action scene that follows it is really good. It's just that you find out that the whole sequence is a vision, and I don't really know what that vision was supposed to mean, because he goes down into the ruin, he finds the sword, he fights the giant skeleton, which very much gave me Bloodborne, Dark Souls, Elden Ring kind of vibes, and that was really cool. He beats it, and then all of a sudden the camera just pans over and shows Amleth standing there taking the sword from the skeleton, and it falls apart, and I'm like, okay, what did the action scene mean? But overall, I loved The Northman. I thought Robert Eggers really managed to just create a really fantastic, epic, Viking historical epic. Yes, sure, narratively, it's not the most original thing, but it's still very much the principle of if you're gonna tell a familiar story, tell it well, and Robert Eggers told it incredibly well. The fact that this movie isn't doing well at the box office really just hurts my heart a bit, because historical epics are fantastic when done right. Things like A Gladiator are just incredibly fantastic films. The fact that The Last Duel last year also flopped was just incredibly heartbreaking to me. The Last Duel was a fantastic film, and no one saw it. I mean, granted, it was marketed horribly, but still, it was a fantastic film, and just... it upsets me that the general audience nowadays don't really want to go to the cinema to see something like A Northman, or The Last Duel, or A West Side Story. They kind of just want to go and see action-adventure stuff, and whilst I love action-adventure stuff, historical epics have that semblance to it. I mean, The Northman action is incredible, and better than most of the action movies we get today. And with The Last Duel, I can kind of see why it didn't do as well. It was still in an era of the pandemic where people were still hesitant to go to the cinema, but also, Disney didn't market that film very well. But with The Northman, people are going back to the cinema. Spider-Man No Way Home showed that, but why did no one want to see The Northman? This film is genuinely amazing. Like, sure, it's not a film to take the whole family and the kids to, But overall, as a fan of cinema, this film is a must-see. But either way, it cemented the fact that I love Robert Eggers as a director, and I genuinely cannot wait to see what he makes next, and hopefully he goes and makes something similar akin to The Northman. I actually read an interview the other day where he said that he only wants to make films that are period pieces, and I kind of love that. I think that's a really cool thing. But either way, I can't wait to see what he does next. Hopefully he does something just as epic as The Northman. And yeah, that's pretty much my thoughts on The Northman. I loved it. If you haven't seen it, go see it. If it's playing in a cinema near you, I implore you to go out and see it, because this film needs to make as much money as it possibly can make, because even though it's flopping, it doesn't deserve to be. If it's not playing in a cinema near you, watch it as soon as you can, as soon as it becomes available to rent, buy, or is on streaming, because this movie's just, it's so good. But what did you guys think of The Northman? Let me know in the comments down below. Like, subscribe, follow me on social media, all that good stuff. And until we meet again, I'll see you guys next time.